The year is 2005. You wake up on a cool summer morning and head down to the living room to boot up the family computer. You open Internet Explorer, and as you scroll through web pages, you come across an article. Microsoft is announcing a new version of Windows, previously codenamed Longhorn, but soon to be released under the name Windows Vista. Today, we know Vista didn't do too well, and is largely overshadowed by its successor and more streamlined counterpart, Windows 7. But what Vista is remembered for, however, is its unique design language, Aero. Aero is a backronym that stands for Authentic, Energetic, Reflective, and Open. Major elements of the Aero design language include heavy use of transparent UI elements, typically given a glossy or glassy finish, skeuomorphic icons meant to reflect real-world objects, and a wide use of light rays and gradients. Vista's unique design caught on among tech companies and became one of the defining design languages of the late 2000s and early 2010s. Today we remember Aero mostly as a pillar of a much larger aesthetic, one that dominated that period of time before widespread social media use. Frutiger Aero. The Frutiger in Frutiger Aero comes from a font family by the same name, created by Swiss designer Adrian Frutiger. Both the Frutiger font family and Microsoft's Aero design language combined to create a new aesthetic, one defined by the intersection between technology and nature, and an optimistic, almost utopian outlook on the future. You might have heard Frutiger Aero referred to as the future we were promised, and that's easy to buy into. The aesthetics we grew up with implied a future of techno-ecological utopia. As time went on, though, it seems we could not be further from it. I love Frutiger Aero, the bright colors, the natural elements, the utopian vision of the future, and of course the design elements of the late 2000s and early 2010s that many of us grew up with. On its face, it's a fun aesthetic that aims to imitate an interesting period of design during the infancy of consumer technology. And that's exactly what it is, an imitation. Frutiger Aero as a term was coined in 2017 by Sophie Jian of the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute, and for an aesthetic that came up during the late 2000s, you think it would be labeled much earlier. This makes Frutiger Aero a retronym, meaning that the concept didn't really exist until we had already moved past it. It was defined after the fact. In this video, I want to address that idea. Is Frutiger Aero, as we think of it today, truly the future that was promised to us? As time has gone by, we've attributed a lot to this aesthetic that wasn't really there in the first place. Rather, Frutiger Aero as it existed is not as we remember it, and neither was its optimistic outlook. Nowhere is this idea more apparent than the music of the Frutiger Aero aesthetic. Take a look at this, the most popular Frutiger Aero playlist on Spotify. While it does a very good job of representing the modern aesthetic attributed to Frutiger Aero, I want you to look at some of the individual songs. While some are reimaginings of tracks from old video games or consoles, the majority are fully original compositions that were only released in the past 5 to 6 years. How is it possible that these relatively new songs represent a design aesthetic that emerged in the late 2000s? For the purpose of this video, I want to separate Frutiger Aero music into two categories. One that denotes tracks which contain real nostalgic elements from the past, or actually are from the 2000s or early 2010s, and one for all other contemporary tracks which aim to emulate the sound of the former. This is an important distinction because it allows us to analyze the elements that define Frutiger Aero, the old design language, and Frutiger Aero, the modern aesthetic. I want to start with nostalgic Frutiger Aero music. As previously mentioned, a majority of these tracks are from old video games or consoles. Tracks include LEASE by Takeshi Abo, Wii U Mii Maker theme, Wii Party main theme, Lotus Waters from the Yume Tuki soundtrack, and Oivomaitnt by Koronba. LEASE by Takeshi Abo is probably the most iconic Frutiger Aero track, and it has an interesting history. LEASE appeared on the soundtrack for My Merry May, a visual novel released for the Sega Dreamcast in 2002. Being Japanese exclusive, the game is actually quite obscure, and there's not a lot of information about it online, though it was re-released on Nintendo Switch this year, only in Japan though. Regardless, LEASE, as well as some other tracks from My Merry May, have become the poster child for Frutiger Aero music online, and for good reason. It's a great song, and I think the soft instrumentation and light sound definitely reflect the bubbly Frutiger Aero aesthetic. Various themes from the Wii and Wii U are very reflective of the Frutiger Aero time period, and they hold some inherent nostalgia for being an integral part to many people's childhood. Many of these tracks are released on streaming platforms without official clearance, or are remixed in some way to make them distinct. In the case of the Wii U Mii Maker, it has been released as the track New Look by Secret Potion, and has a lo-fi quality to it. Lotus Waters is interesting because it originates from a Yume Nikki fan game, Yume Tuki. This name makes a lot more sense in Japanese, where tu is pronounced ni, so it would be pronounced Yume Nikki as a sort of pun. Yume Tuki is a collaborative fan game that started in 2007, featuring hundreds of explorable worlds and locations, and continues to add content to this day. Lotus Waters shares the name of its online location, an open, watery area filled with abstract marble structures and lotus flowers floating on pink water. This type of Frutiger Aero music is an accurate representation of the time period, though I don't know if it's necessarily applicable to the design language of Frutiger Aero. The Wii and Wii U themes definitely are, as the consoles themselves draw design inspiration from the sleek Aero aesthetic, but unrelated songs, such as LEASE or Lotus Waters, were associated with the aesthetic after the fact. In a way, they aren't any closer to being authentic Frutiger Aero than newer songs are. I want to introduce you all to a word: Simulacra. You might have heard this term before, such as the game Simulacra, or in reference to some sort of simulation like in The Matrix or Risk of Rain 2, but in postmodern philosophy, the term simulacra was used by French philosopher Jean Baudrillard in his book Simulacra and Simulation to describe how modern society replaces real concepts with symbols and signs. These representations of reality become so prevalent that they eventually become copies that have no original. They have overtaken what they were meant to portray. They are simulacra, and they're representations of something that never truly existed, or at least drifted so far from its original form that they're something else entirely. In Baudrillard's model, the original concepts were called the signified, while the copies are the signifiers. For example, a drawing of a dog is a signifier for the real four-legged canine, which is the signified. Baudrillard posits that when the signifiers become more important, more desirable, or more real than the signified, that is when we enter hyperreality, a world of signifiers without substance. These signifiers are designed to be engaging, interesting, and almost perfect in ways the originals weren't. If you recall from the intro that footage of Windows XP, that wasn't a genuine copy or a virtual machine, but rather an in-browser remake, made to pay homage to the original operating system. It's a signifier that works as an outlet for nostalgia for the signified. John Baudrillard couldn't have possibly predicted the smorgasbord of niche internet microaesthetics of today, but his model definitely applies to the bastardization of Frutiger Aero as a design language. The internet has slowly taken aspects of Frutiger Aero and flanderized it to the point that it no longer resembles the original design language that it was founded upon. Let's talk about the signifiers. Contemporary Frutiger Aero music. A large majority of popular Frutiger Aero music online was made in the last 5 to 6 years. This isn't a bad thing. The aesthetic has slowly become more defined over time, allowing composers to better portray it. I said that contemporary Frutiger Aero music is an imitation of genuine music from the 2000s, and it's not the only genre to do this. Vaporwave, a micro-genre of electronic music, emerged in the 2010s as an outlet for 80s and 90s nostalgia, often sampling corporate commercials and lounge or elevator music. Vaporwave also has an incredibly defined visual aesthetic, but that's a story for another time. One interesting thing about the genre, however, is that Vaporwave doesn't operate purely on nostalgia, but also functions as a scathing satire against late 20th century corporate office culture. Unlike Frutiger Aero, Vaporwave makes fun of the techno-optimism and hyper-consumerism of its signified time period. I want to introduce you all to another word, hauntology. Coined by philosopher Jacques Derrida in 1993, hauntology describes the idea that the present is filled with the ghosts of futures that never came. We are haunted by the promises made by the past, what we thought the future would become. Think of The Jetsons, Blade Runner, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Black Ops 2, Cyberpunk 2077. Some of these are still set in the future, but I think we can say we're not on track with their vision. All of these are hauntologies. Their ideas of the future never came to fruition. The name Vaporwave comes from vaporware, a term popular during the 80s and 90s among tech companies describing products given incredible hype in marketing that never actually released. Vaporwave aims not only to reflect the unfulfilled promises of the tech industry at the time, but the hauntology of the future that we never got because of it. Similarly, Frutiger Aero looks back on its utopian idea of the future with nostalgia, but doesn't criticize its naivety. Frutiger Aero's optimistic future, much like Vaporwave's, was grounded in the promises of tech companies that were clearly never going to work out, and bolstered by hyper-consumerism, but it doesn't see a problem with it. The modern Frutiger Aero aesthetic is consumed by hauntology and the regret of its future, rather than discussing the future itself. Contemporary Frutiger Aero tracks include An Old Smile by Macabre Plaza, "2004 Yermal by Zan, and any track from alyzea, or 2003 Toyota Corolla. Among others. There are even some tracks on the aforementioned Spotify playlist that contain heavy vaporwave elements, such as Implanted Memories by Infinity Frequencies, or Online Office version 4.20 by Cat System Corp. If you recall my video on liminal space music, I didn't talk much about the structure of a lot of the music because it's kind of all over the place. Atmospheric and ambient music tends to trend that way. Here instead, the tracks are much closer to what you expect when you think of a song. Repetitive melodies, clear and defined sections, and a lot more respect for melodic substance over texture. Frutiger Aero as a music genre is defined largely by its instrumentation. Here to tell us about this is my friend from the Small Artists Initiative.
Much like liminal music, what makes a song Frutiger Aero is determined by its vibe and can be pretty abstract at times, but there are several defining factors, the most prominent of which is the instrumentation. Acoustic guitars are often used in nostalgic Frutiger Aero songs. They're usually not perfect and pristine, but kind of low quality and raw. Mallet instruments or pitched percussion instruments are also very common. These plunky and short sounds give off that lighthearted, exploratory feeling, the vibe of childlike fascination. It helps that they are used in and are therefore reminiscent of soundtracks like My Neighbor Totoro by Joe Hisaishi. Additionally, more modern Frutiger Aero songs tend to have sounds that are either directly pulled from or just meant to emulate technology-related sounds from the early 2000s. Automated phone call messages, operating system sound effects, and more contribute to that nostalgic techno-future vibe. World instruments, or instruments from very specific parts of the world, can be heard a lot in the edutainment style of Frutiger Aero. Bagpipes, pan flutes, harmonicas, hand pans, and other instruments are some good examples. Pan flutes and handpans are especially common because they were used in soundtracks for games like Super Mario 64 and are now publicly available as downloadable virtual instrument samples. These are the intersection of nostalgia, simulacra, and interconnectedness. They're simulations of instruments from around the world that were used in an extremely popular old video game. In fact, it's rare that any track, even sometimes the acoustic guitar, is recorded live. Rather, Frutiger Aero relies on MIDI instruments, recreations or resamplings of real instruments. Taking a default MIDI piano preset and adding some MIDI guitars and synth pad chords in the background would make for a basic, standard, but definitely Frutiger Aero track. Above all other instruments, though, are FM synths. FM, or frequency modulation, is a type of audio synthesis used to create synthesizer sounds. While it can definitely create some more complex presets and interesting sounds, the most basic of FM's capabilities are the pinnacle of the Frutiger Aero sound. They're sort of instant Frutiger Aero instruments. Understandably, they were very popular alongside commercials or games in the Frutiger Aero era. This Toyota commercial,
Toyota, we're moving forward in hybrid technology.
And this LG ad are both examples of FM pluck synths. BandLab's FM series of instruments also demonstrates this really quickly and easily. FM tines, FM keys, and the others are, like before, instant Frutiger Aero presets. This type of instrument is found even more commonly in present-day contemporary Frutiger Aero. It's what most modern, classic Frutiger Aero songs are based on. All of this just emphasizes Joey's point. Yes, many aspects of the modern Frutiger Aero scene, especially in terms of music, were taken from and inspired by real aesthetics from the past, but they also take on a new life of their own in retrospect. The internet is full of obscure musicians sharing their Frutiger Aero passions with the world through their songs, sometimes even blending it with other genres. This is just a fraction of the afterlife that Frutiger Aero was given online.
Thank you, and definitely check out their channel, they make some great stuff. The way the instrumentation works really only compounds my point. In using digital instruments, you're creating a signifier for the signified real instrument. This again just draws parallels to the aesthetic itself, which aims to emulate its original, more genuine form. As I mentioned previously, a lot of nostalgic Frutiger Aero music was created as background music essentially. Video game console menus, soundtracks for visual novels, and the like. I think it's interesting that contemporary Frutiger Aero music, despite trying to emulate background music, actually engages with the listener more intensely, harmonically speaking. But again, contemporary Frutiger Aero music is trying to emulate those aesthetics. There was no intention in LEASE's composition that made it the poster child of Frutiger Aero music, since we simply assigned it that role. In contrast, contemporary Frutiger Aero music exists with the knowledge of the aesthetic, and is making intentional choices in instrumentation, structure, and presentation to appeal to it. Recall, though, that this aesthetic it intends to replicate is not the one that truly existed, but the one that's been remembered. If you watch my videos, there's a good chance you saw Kane Pixel's Backrooms movie. Or at least the found footage series. If you haven't, there will be spoilers for it in this section, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want to hear them. The complex, as it exists in the Backrooms, is a vast, open array of seemingly infinite rooms and hallways. It does not exist independently of the real world, though. Rather, it's the experiences of collective human consciousness that form and shape it. To elaborate, the complex exists as the remnants of a remembered lived experience. The Backrooms remembers every mundane liminal space you've ever walked through, but it gets details wrong. Things aren't replicated exactly as they are in the real world. The complex remembers the signified and creates the signifiers from their memory. This turns into a self-eating cycle of recollection until the original is unrecognizable in its descendants. It is in this way that the Backrooms exist as a hyperreality. The real is replaced by copies of itself until it no longer bears any resemblance. For example, the still lifes in the film are misremembered representations of people on the outside of the complex, existing independently as separate entities. When signifiers drift from the signified, they become unique in a way. The film uses that concept in the context of horror, but culturally it has a much larger impact. The way that aesthetics on the internet become saturated to the point of losing meaning is incredibly similar. Think of how many buzzwords you see on a daily basis that used to hold meaning before being overused. Gaslighting, shoegaze, niche, psyop, cringe, rage bait. Hell, even the word buzzword has become a buzzword to a point. This gets legitimately harmful in political spaces with words like woke being used to target marginalized people. To be clear, I'm not saying that this is inherently a bad thing. I love Frutiger Aero as it exists on the internet today, and I think the original Aero design language wasn't as interesting on a surface level compared to what it's been turned into. That being said, perpetuating Frutiger Aero as it exists today as an accurate representation of the past, or claiming its outlook was promised to us, seems disingenuous. We've all heard this said by now. Frutiger Aero was the future we were promised. The harmonious intersection of technology and the environment, the prevalence of physical media, and the maintenance of early 2000s web design. We could have had it all, right? Well, here's the thing. This was never the outlook the world as a whole had on the future. Sure, we were more optimistic than today, but there was never a time in human history when the majority of companies and governments decided to sacrifice profits for the preservation, or especially growth, of the environment, or use tech to actively better humanity. I chose to use Frutiger Aero music as the catalyst for this discussion because it's the perfect microcosm of Frutiger Aero's modern iteration. Even outside of the music, the genuine web design and visions of the future at the time were a lot different than what's being portrayed of them on the internet today. The little representation Frutiger Aero did have before 2017 was entirely corporate. Clean white skyscrapers and offices, futuristic tech products, and most importantly, it was almost exclusively seen in advertisements. Sure, there were some cool sustainability projects that used Frutiger Aero, such as Vincent Calabout's cityscape concepts, but there were still weird corporate undertones. And I think that this is the issue that underlines all genuine Frutiger Aero material from back in the day. The large majority of it that was used to define today's conception of Frutiger Aero was synthesized by tech companies as a way to push their vision of the future, one where their product is ubiquitous. And of course, this is all without any genuine care for the ecological utopia they're portraying. I mean, think about it. If corporations really did want to shoot for a future where technology and the environment converged in these beautiful ways, they could have done it. This isn't like any other retro-futuristic utopias where it was simply a pipe dream about the wonders of future technology. Even though Frutiger Aero did have some fantastical inventions, the main appeal was always its focus on the preservation and maintenance of these large, open, grassy landscapes existing alongside modern infrastructure. That isn't an unrealistic vision of the future at all, just one that big corporations and the government decided wasn't worth their time. In conclusion, Frutiger Aero as it existed was vapor. It feels inaccurate to say it was the future that was promised to us because it never really was. Even back then, it existed largely as a corporate advertising tool, not a real vision of the future. It's kind of like looking at something like corporate Memphis today and going, God, I can't wait for a future like that. Like I said earlier, Vaporwave is also built on a disingenuous vision of the future, but unlike Vaporwave, we choose to look back on it and instead of looking at it critically and criticizing it, we romanticize it. And again, I don't dislike Frutiger Aero at all. I think the modern conception of it is truly beautiful in its own right. But to say that it's an accurate representation of, or even really the same aesthetic as its earlier iteration, seems wrong. That being said, saying that Frutiger Aero was the future that was promised to us is nothing more than nostalgia. It's vapid, but ultimately I think it reflects a deep dissatisfaction with current society. Of course we want that utopian vision of the future more than ever, now that every aspect of our modern world seems to be in contrast to it. Governments seem very disinterested in protecting our environment, and sometimes almost actively harmful to it, in pursuit of profit. Companies are much the same. Modern technology is super derivative now, always trying to prey on our nostalgia. Nothing like those unique mock-ups or revolutionary ideas we used to have back in the day. But honestly, looking back shows that it's always been this way, to an extent. I mean, things are worse now, but the vision of Frutiger Aero was always going to be a lie because of the same reason things suck now. The government and corporations have always thrown the environment under the bus to make a profit, even during the peak of Frutiger Aero design, but it's just gotten more blatant in the past few years. Being that it's always been a thing, Frutiger Aero was never really in the cards for our future, despite it not being super unrealistic, logistically speaking. I think it's best to be a lot more critical of our nostalgia. Never blindly trust in your memory, and most importantly, allow yourself to think critically about the promises of tomorrow. If you have any thoughts on this video you want to share, please put them down in the comments because I'd love to hear them. And please check out the Small Artists Initiative. They put out some great content on their channel. They just made their own video on Frutiger Aero, and I have my own section in their video as well. And as always, thanks for watching.